Welcome to the Grumpy Social Workers podcast with me, Soyeb
and me, Siobhan McLean. Here's your place for social work conversations that keep things real.
Right, so this is our, sixth podcast, Siobhan. I know when we first had the idea of a podcast, we said we'd do 6 and see how that goes. And just some reflections really on how our experience has been doing a podcast, I suppose, as well. But how they've gone, has it met what we wanted it to meet as well? I've never done a podcast before. So I did, in some ways I found it strange. I think I always find it strange when I know I'm being recorded and sometimes you kind of follow that natural kind of conversation mode because of it. But whenever I speak to you, Siobhan, I think you just brought me back into that grumpiness and that natural self that I have. So it's been quite interesting. I think I have enjoyed doing them as well. I think the other thing I found, I think I said to you when we did our third and fourth one, I was having a great day. And I think that's really interesting as well, isn't it? In terms of being conscious of how we feel every day as well. Some days we probably do feel grumpy, but we feel more able to vent around that as well. So we're kind of more outward. And then I think there's some days when we do have those kind of low points and we feel deflated about whatever we're doing, our social work itself, and we become inwards a little bit as well. And I suppose that links into some of the sessions we've talked about in terms of virtual working and stuff as well. That's just one of the my reflections on the podcast itself. But in terms of what we wanted to achieve from it, I think for me, one of the things I wanted to do, because I was so conscious that we offer lots of CPD offers to everybody who can kind of think about social work in whatever way they can. Sometimes people can't attend those half-day training sessions or full-day training sessions. So we thought maybe a podcast where we just do a snippet of very short ones, around half an hour, so that people have the opportunity or hopefully have more time to listen to those and have their own reflections on some of the themes and topics we've talked about as well, and really think about the roles they play as social workers. So I'm hoping we've achieved that. I think for me, it was a bit of a venting space as well, another venting space for me as a social worker, being able to kind of have that peer support or have that peer venting support as well. And I think it's definitely done that. I think the topic we've talked about or the topics we've kind of covered, I've definitely noted that I tend to start off very grumpy about it. And then the more we talk about it, the more I make sense of it. And I'm able to kind of calm myself down a bit more around those. And that's the whole purpose of supervision, isn't it, as well? And having that kind of those times to reflect and talk to other people as well. But I think those are kind of my very quick reflections on the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you were saying, you've never done a podcast before. I've done a couple of podcasts where I've been invited by the podcasters to come along and, be interviewed. But I've never done anything like this where it's just us chatting. And I think it's interesting because one of the things that I have felt for quite a long time, and we actually talked about in the last podcast, is about people working a lot alone from home and not listening into those conversations. And I just remember how much I learned as a newly qualified social worker, listening into some of what I would have thought of then as the grumpy old social workers, actually, but I would have listened in and learned lots. And I wondered whether that was sort of partly why I was drawn to us doing this together. And I have found it really interesting, but I do think we take quite a different approach as well, which I also think is good because then you've got two different grumpy social workers. And I know that you're going to take a different approach after this is finished because we've been recording these and you're going to listen to them all and make sure you're happy with it. I can't listen to myself. I hate listening to myself. So I'll just probably leave it to you to listen to, make sure you're happy with them. And all, I just don't like listening to myself. So I do think that we take a different approach to the way that we've gone about it. You've been much more kind of putting down some thoughts that you want to think about and prepared. And I've just throwing it all in, and I think sometimes that's probably taken you by surprise because I'd not said, I might talk about this or I might mention that. And you've probably been a bit, I didn't know that was coming. Because we've just taken quite a different approach. But I suppose that's helpful, isn't it, really? And a recognition that we are all different, actually. All of us are as social workers. And I think it's one of the great things about being a social worker is, we are all different and we take different approaches and we do things differently. And there's obviously boundaries of good practice and boundaries of things that we, work within. But I think it's one of the joys of being a social worker is that our roles can be so varied, our approaches to things can be so varied. So I wonder if that's also shown in it. I'm going to use this and doing these podcasts with you. I'm going to use this as one of my pieces for my Social Work England CPD this year. So, I'm registered both in England and in Northern Ireland. And in England, we've got to do the CPD. And I was thinking I'm going to use these, but I'm also going to use a particular model of reflection. I love models of reflection, as you know. And there's fairly new one developed by Mark Wareing, which is based around 4 words of me, my, more, and must. And one of the things I'm going to do is kind of think about me and who I am and where, and, a bit like I said last time, where I am in terms of sort of my stages of development and, all of that. And then think about my experiences of doing the podcast with you, and then think about what more could we have done, maybe what could we have done differently, what more could I have done, particularly in terms of that kind of relationship and doing the podcast. But then I do feel like maybe I must continue. The must is the end bit. And I feel like I must continue to find a space to be grumpy, because I think it is important sometimes. And, when we did that first webinar and we said, look, we mean grumpy in this sense, I think there is a sense where we do need to be able to say, this is what we're finding challenging and this is what's tricky. And then, we can learn from one another. I've learned a lot from you and felt like, oh, okay, particularly around the AI. I mean, I've still got some concerns around it, but, particularly around AI, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I've got a huge amount of respect for Soyeb and his practice. And so if he's finding AI, then maybe, so it's really helped me to think about, moving things on, moving away from being grumpy and finding ways forward. So I think that's my must is I need to find that space. There's something, isn't there, in social work about having critical friendships. And I think that critical friend is someone that will ask you questions you've not thought of and will, suggest things and we all need a critical friend. And I wonder whether with new ways of working, how do we develop those critical friendships? And maybe with people being virtual, are we looking more for virtual critical friendships? I don't know. Maybe that's what we can offer on the podcast, a virtual critical friendship of listening to. I don't know, but I must carry on finding a space for these kinds of conversations because they've been really valuable to me. So I suppose that's my reflection. And I'm just thinking, jotting down, well, here's what I'll put in my Social Work England CPD, and I'll use that me, my, more, must, because it is a really good, reflective model for thinking about ourselves. But you also said that we said we'd do these webinars and they're about half an hour. And I think, I think they're all longer than half an hour. I'm sure we can't, you and me, when we talk, we can't keep to just half an hour. So I'm sure they're longer.
Yeah, I think they are. And I think we've said that after most of the podcast, we could have talked a lot more and we could have kind of tangent of the theme and topic because they're all interlinked on there. And then you start talking about other aspects and stuff as well. I wonder if AI can be a critical friend, Siobhan. I'll look into that for you and see if you can be friends with AI as a critical friend. That might persuade you. In terms of reflections on the themes that we covered, I think we kind of looked at supervision, identity, anti-oppressive practice, AI and virtual working as well. I think they were all really interesting topics. I think, again, they were topics that we could have talked about for a lot longer as well. I'm not sure what my reflections on some of those are, but in terms of supervision, I think, again, having that discussion, I'm not sure if my grumpiness has gone away around that theme of supervision, or whether, the importance I think there is to social specific supervision that then links to your identity as well, and how much we value supervision as social workers in terms of that. So having that space to sit down with another social worker and look at our identity, look at reflections, linking our practice to the social values, ethics, theories, models, etc. as well. So I think that just highlighted for me the importance of that. And the identity bit, as you know, is something that I'm really passionate about. I constantly get grumpy about, and I think I will until I retire or end up in a box, one or the other. And I think throughout our conversations, we've talked about identity, haven't we, in terms of um, even when we talk about AI, we spoke about whether there should be a social work role within technology space. But yeah, I think the identity is something. The one I found really interesting, Siobhan, is, and I think I emailed you after the podcast just to say, sorry, I was a bit quiet today and I don't think I engaged enough, was the anti-oppressive practice one. So that's one that I thought I would have lots to say because, again, I'm very passionate about equality, diversity, inclusion. I do a lot of training around, those kind of themes, and I'm really passionate about gene possession, black magic, mental health. But I think when we spoke about some of the themes and topics, and especially some of the things you were saying there, I think I went into very much of a reflective mode that day, and I think I realized how much I don't know. And I think afterwards I was thinking there's so much more learning for me to do. I don't know if there's so much learning for me to do or whether it was because the color climate is so complex. I'm not sure how I navigate that. And I think that's where that one left me feeling. And I've not really thought about it since, although I am gonna, because it's something I do need to think about a bit more. But I wonder if that kind of links in with the political literacy stuff and how we navigate some of that as social workers. So I think there's a lot. And every time I turn on the radio, I think I continue to become unclear. Like yesterday, I was driving to do a training session actually, and I was listening to radio for about 2 hours doing that, and we were talking about all the issues that have been going on in terms of the rights and stuff, and the political kind of views coming out. And then this morning I was listening to radio around, health workers not being able to wear certain badges and things as well, because it might give a certain political view that some people might not agree with, and how that leaves our patients or customers or service users. And yeah, I think all of that leaves me in a lot of uncertainty, I think, in terms of how I navigate that, especially if you're doing training around that as well, and you're trying to kind of support other staff members to navigate that. So that's something I think I really need to think about and navigate as well. But I think that was one that left me with a lot more uncertainty. So I'm not going to be grumpy about that for a while, I don't think, because I need to kind of focus on what it actually means for me. Yeah.
I wonder if as well, I mean, we haven't spoken about this and, so please do tell me if I've got this wrong, but I'm wondering, I said in the last podcast, I like wondering, and I'm wondering, listening to you, I haven't thought about this before, and to be honest with you, I didn't notice that you were more quiet in that podcast either. So maybe that's my issue. Maybe I should have noticed that if you felt that. But I do think that, I'm a white woman. We're very different in terms of race and gender and ethnicity and all of those things. And I do wonder whether, because we expect people who've experienced racism to talk about their experiences of racism, to think about that. And it's a trauma. Racism is a trauma. And what we're doing is asking people to relive that trauma constantly. And whilst I'm very conscious of the current climate and I'm really wanting to check in with my global majority colleagues and how safe they feel, I wonder whether that the climate, did that also have an impact perhaps on, your own experiences and your own sense of, I don't know, safety, in terms of like all the flags are going up round where I am at the minute, and that whole sense of safety for people in that and how safe people can feel. I think I don't know. I'm just wondering whether that also, can it impact on people's confidence at speaking and talking about things. And, I've just done a video on my YouTube channel with a black man. And he said to me, please, can you switch the comments off before you post it? I didn't even know how to switch the comments off on my YouTube channel. I had to look it up, I had to find it out, and I had to do that. But I thought, how sad that we have to do that. I can understand that, and I was completely respectful of the need for that, and I understood it. But I suppose I've never thought about something that I want to say, I want to switch comments off on. And yet his experiences had been that comments previously had been really negative. And I just think it's awful. Maybe that's part of white privilege that I'm not recognizing that. I don't know.
And I think that safety bit is really interesting because when I was driving to the training session, listening to that radio program, when I got there, there was actually a section in that training program where we were talking about themes around EDI. And I said to them at that stage, because I'd been to that same venue a few weeks ago, and driving there, I'd noticed, the white flags up and the areas, and I'm always kind of a bit conscious of that. And I said to them, I actually thought about emailing L&D, their L&D, to say, I'm not coming tomorrow because I wasn't sure how safe I'd be because I don't know that area well enough. And I said to them, when I came last time, when I walked through from the car park to the venue, it was very much a white British area. And I thought, I'm not sure about the views and I'm not sure how they're going to take the current political things that are going on. Am I going to become a target? So maybe it is that. Maybe it's subconscious that I'm kind of, it's affecting my confidence in, and the other one was, I was very conscious that the audience I had, how many of them, what views do they have, because usually I walk in feeling very confident to talk about EDI, and specifically talk about the global majority background very confidently, but I just wasn't, maybe some of that as well. But yeah, interesting.
I suppose, this isn't something that we plan to talk about. This shows how we go off on tangents and it's just our conversations, But I suppose what I'm wondering is that word safe. We talk a lot about safe spaces now in social work. We focus a lot on the word safe in our practice because we want to keep people safe and support them to keep themselves safe. But then we also talk about having safe spaces within supervision to make sure people can talk about emotions and so on. But I'm trying now in my workshops and training, I try and talk about having safe and brave spaces so that we balance that. And I wonder whether those of us who are white social workers need to be brave about talking about that and raising issues around race so that we create safe and brave spaces together. And so that maybe we move the venues of training if they don't feel like they're in a safer area, or maybe even just asking those questions or raising those issues. And I always want to make sure, I don't have a full understanding of people's different cultural backgrounds and so on. And I want to make sure that I'm not going to be, but sometimes I wonder, am I going to be clumsy here? Am I going to get something wrong? But I think if we're brave in that, people respect that and will support us to learn. So I suppose there's something there about being both safe and being brave and working through that together and thinking about that and just being wondering more. That's my thing. Let's wonder together. And that concept, I think it's the cultural friendliness, that of being friendly and open and listening and really caring for one another and checking in with one another. I think that's really important at the moment. So maybe you weren't expecting me to ask that question or to say that, but I suppose it was as you were talking, I was thinking, I also feel bad that I didn't realise that you felt that you were quieter in that one. Maybe I just talked too much.
Maybe I was too conscious I was making you talk too much and I didn't contribute enough. But yeah, some really interesting stuff there. And and I think when you kind of that word togetherness, I think I often kind of feel that sometimes when we're kind of navigating some of these issues, especially when there's something political going on, and as social workers, we know where we stand with our ethics and values, but they might be contradictory to what is going on politically at that time and what terminology is being used and things as well. And I think that's when social workers, because I've had this discussion with social workers in those scenarios, and they'll often say to me, "Shub, so what can we say and what can we not? What can we get involved in and what can we not?" And I think we probably spoke about that in one of the podcasts, but I just feel that togetherness in terms of a social profession just isn't there. But I don't see. I know I can seek it out, but it's not in my face. So one of the things actually I did after the session, after this, because, in that radio program, they were talking a lot about anti-white prejudice. So, and I've got a session coming up next week around with our social work around CPD, and we've got various themes and topics. So I actually Googled and used the AI as well to see if there was anything out there from the social work profession, especially those kind of leaders or organizations that lead on social work, to see if they put out anything over the last few days around what's been going on politically. And I couldn't find anything. And I found that really sad that there's this massive kind of political blowout going on recently that will have an impact on social workers, but also on individuals that social workers support, on the communities that social workers support. And we're a bit torn in terms of how we navigate that. And there's no direction from anywhere. So then you feel very isolated, and you either become a bit radical and you end up doing something that potentially may get you into trouble, or you just think, I'm not going to say anything. And then you're part of that problem then, aren't you? Because that silence, you're not being the ally and everything else we talk about. Yeah, and I think it's some of that as well. I think that leadership just is missing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Absolutely. That leadership and the togetherness thing is really important. And funny enough, I was out yesterday with I want to say retired social worker, but actually she's still working in social work, but she's been around so many years, and she's still working, but she's way past what we would consider to be retirement age. And she was talking about elements of this togetherness and us not coming together in ways that we would have done in, during her actual employed career, if you like. She's working independently now. And then I was thinking about, yes, when I was a newly qualified social worker, I was out at demonstrations with placards about, human rights and all that. And yet now it's almost like, I don't know, is professionalization being used against us? Because now, it's not professional to behave in that way. Or, well, actually, this is about fighting for people's human rights. And this is about, it dates me, but, it was poll tax demonstrations I was on all of the time. And, because I thought there was stuff around poverty. And I just think now we almost just respond as social workers to what politicians are giving us, as opposed to trying to actively get involved and actively change things, and that coming together. I think in many ways we're almost more together because, globalization, we can contact social workers all over the world very easily on social media and things. So in some ways we're more together, and yet in other ways we're much less together because we're not working around, these are some of the ethical issues, these are some of the, and as you say, there's no leadership there. And I know lots of different, marginalized groups, social workers from Romani traveller backgrounds, Jewish social workers. So, a whole range of social workers, as well as global majority workers, feeling that the oppression that they face and what's going on, it just isn't, it's almost ignored by the profession. And yet that wouldn't have happened previously. So where is the leadership? Where are our thoughts around anti-oppressive practice? So yes. And I know things are really difficult at the moment in terms of safety for lots of different people within social work. And I hope that actually, maybe that's one of the hopes that I'd have as a grumpy social worker, is that we can be more together and recognise that, we have more in common than divides us, but actually coming together and showing society how we can come together. I suppose that for me, that's something that's really important.
Yeah.
Maybe that takes us into our other grumpy things. Other things we're grumpy about, Soyeb, I don't know, because we've covered those, I suppose, really in a way, because our first podcast, we've done 6. Our first one was an intro. This one is a kind of overview. So really, we've talked about 4 topics that make us grumpy. We've talked about supervision, professional identity, anti-oppressive practice, and then AI, virtual working, some of the newer stuff. But there's so many other things that I'm grumpy about. Like, I'm really grumpy about some of that professional leadership and that coming together. I don't know, what other things are you grumpy about?
Can list loads of, depending on what mood I'm in, Siobhan. But let me think. I think CPD is definitely one that I think about a lot at the moment, and a couple of reasons why. So CPD training, etc. One is, we put on lots of training sessions and then nobody books on, or if they do book on, they don't rock up. It infuriates me. But also, and I think it infuriates me because of another grumpiness that's linked to that, is because it's so hard to find the funding to run training sessions specific for social workers on CPD, because in NHS, we can't actually get any funding for CPD. And I think that's another bit of grumpiness there as well. I think just the lack of response. We talked about AI and virtual working and stuff, but I think I sent off a really grumpy email actually about 2-3 weeks ago to all our social workers saying, will you just at least acknowledge that you've seen my email? because it's really frustrating when I send an email out, and it can be something quite, well, I think it's fairly important, something we put a lot of effort and work into it. And from something like 180 responses that we should have, we get 2. And I just sit there going, why am I doing this? Is there any point? But I think that really kind of irritates me sometimes as well. And I think um, that the word creativity and research and stuff for social workers, I think we've lost that, and it really frustrates me when I'm in a venue and we're talking about something, or we talk about a theme or a topic, and I just think, why can't you be creative? Why can't you not think outside the box? Why are you just kind of so confined by the systems and the frameworks? Absolutely, we need to work to legislation and policy and stuff, but you can still be creative. Be creative and bring those social values and ethics into play and do something, different. So that really frustrates me, I think, as well. See, I told you I could go on for ages around this. I'll talk about 2 more, then I'm going to stop. One is actually 3. One is retirement age. We spoke about this earlier, didn't we? I think social workers should be able to retire at something like 50, just because of the work pressures we work in at the moment. But I think also around, on a serious note, around social work celebration and achievement, I don't think we do enough of that. And that's across the board. I know we have social work awards and stuff, which I find really frustrating and I get really grumpy about, because I just think when I see a social work award event, there's a group of a very few number of social workers that get nominated, and there's even less that actually get to the stage where you see an email saying, oh, so-and-so was nominated. And I think it just makes the social workers that were not nominated, or you don't see the hard work they do because they do it quietly in a quiet space, and they're achieving a lot without being recognized for it. And I just find that really sad and frustrating that not all social workers are kind of celebrated or seen for the achievement they've undertaken over 12-month period or whatever that is. And I think one last one, there's been a judgment recently from Ireland, actually, around the dolls stuff. And I find it really frustrating, Sean, when I see case law, some kind of legal kind of work being published, and you can't understand the thing it's talking about. Why can't it just not be in simple language so you know exactly what they're saying and why they're saying it? But I get really frustrated with that as well. That's just a few. To be honest, I've got loads more on my list, but I'm going to stop there.
Well, I've got a few, and they're probably quite different to yours, but I think you'll probably agree with some of them or be grumpy about some. Maybe I'm making an assumption there, but I've got a few. So one of mine is about hit the ground running. I hate that phrase. And I'm hearing it so much from employers, often senior managers within organizations, but they'll say, we want our newly qualified workers to hit the ground running. And I think it's such an awful phrase, but it's also, how can you expect people to, have so much and get so much thrown at them? And, in my day, when I was newly qualified, you had to be, the expectation was that you would be qualified at least 5 years before you went into work in child protection. Now what's happening is these newly qualified social workers are being thrown in all the time. I read an article the other day where the research said newly qualified social workers were being thrown into a pit. And I kind of feel like that a little bit. There's just this expectation that they're going to come in, and I speak to people who've been qualified 3 months and have got 3 cases in court. And you think, hang on a minute, this is not right. So that makes me really grumpy, the hit the ground running stuff. Linked to that, I really don't like the way that the word resilience is being used in a professional sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do a lot of work around that. A lot of my training, I'm talking about professional resilience, but the way it's used, people talk about challenges and they're told, oh, you've just got to be resilient. You need to be more resilient. I hate the way it's used. Again, things that we've already, I suppose, alluded to here, but again, leadership, that kind of professional leadership that we've got at the moment, I feel very kind of let down by it. I think it's not keeping up with all of the changes and the things that we talked about last time. Regulation, in my career, I can remember a time before we were regulated. I think regulation is really good and really positive, but I think some of the way that it's happening now is very poor. And there's a lot of difference in the different countries, of the UK. And I think some of the regulators are very good and I think some are very poor. And I just think regulation is very varied and it is not great. And then the other thing is kind of social workers' lack of engagement with politics and a lack of awareness, like of some of the things that you've just been saying. And sometimes when I talk to students about it, they go, "Oh, I'm not interested in politics or something." And you think, hang on a minute, we don't not politics on a party political level, but politics on a this is about people level. I think we did touch on that actually in one of the podcasts, but there's so much that I'm grumpy about. And I think sometimes it adds to it. We get more grumpy issues over time. Like just recently, I've been hearing that hit the ground running phrase a lot. So that's making me grumpy about it. Whereas if you'd have asked me that when we were first planning these sessions, it wouldn't have been one of the things that I'd have come up with. So I think our grumpiness evolves, I suppose, is one thing that I'd say. And so I suppose what that means is you've got loads more grumpy issues. I've got loads more grumpy issues. We could actually do more podcasts, but we set out to do 6. So it will very much depend on the response to the grumpy social workers, what people think of it, what people think of the format and the way that we've done it, whether people want us to continue and do a few more. But also, I think what it shows us is we could do a series of grumpy social worker podcasts with grumpy guests, because I'm sure that there are loads of other grumpy social workers out there that might want to join in. And maybe it could lead to not even more podcasts, but just a grumpy social work space where people come together and have a grumpy talk. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that, Shoaib?
A movement of grumpy social workers. I like it. And maybe that's where the leadership is going to come from. No, I think it sounds really good. And I think it is needed at the moment in terms of that venue and space to be grumpy. Definitely. I'm going to add something, go off tangent a little bit, but that phrase in terms of hit the ground running, you just made me think of a grumpiness around that. I don't know about you, Siobhan. When I was a newly qualified social worker, when I came in, I pretty much knew that it's going to take me a good 5, 6, 7, 8 years to kind of go up a grade. Because the expectation at that time was that you've got to develop your skills and knowledge, confidence, and the wisdom that goes with that profession as well. And I get really grumpy when I hear, I don't think it is jealousy. Well, I hope it's not. But when you've got somebody who's kind of been qualified about you and they've kind of not got that previous experience, or they've not been in health or social for 50 years, and they're going up the grades quite quickly, I just wonder where the impact that has, because obviously with that career progression comes more confidence, more responsibility, more autonomy, more independence, more ability to make decisions about people's lives and stuff as well. When I did my AMP training, I was very clearly told you will be going anywhere near that AMP stuff for at least 5 years. And even then, you've got to have an interview and go through that process and stuff. But yeah, that's something I kind of really grapple with as well. So I've gone on tangent a little bit, but I think it's something really important for us all to think about as well, because that skills and knowledge can heavily be there in someone's brain. The experience brings that wisdom and all the things around gut feelings and stuff. And I think if that's missing, it has a huge impact on the decisions we make as well. But absolutely, in terms of, just that one, we could probably do a podcast on that one and talk about why that might be the case, because there's reasons for that as well. But I think there's definitely space to do a few more, depending on how popular these are, how much these are valued as well.
Yeah, I think what that shows is how in lots of them we've almost come to the same topic from it. We're grumpy for different angles, and actually I'm thinking, I see that side of it too. So I love that, and the kind of bringing grumpy things from different perspectives. So there we go. That's been an adventure, hasn't it? Doing the podcast together, Shoaib. It's been an adventure. Thank you for that. I've really enjoyed them. I've really enjoyed learning from you and chat. I love our chats. I love our conversations.
No, it's been great. And the fact that I've done a podcast with Siobhan McLean, whose books and, literature I used to use for my assignments when I was doing my social work courses, it's been a great honor in terms of that as well. So thank you.
The honor is all mine, honestly. We hope you've enjoyed sharing this reflective space with us today. We are the Grumpy Social Workers, Siobhan McLean and Soyeb Azwarat. Listen out for more episodes in the future, and don't forget to let us know what you're feeling grumpy about.